Hello, good morning, and welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. My name is Paul Stringini. We are in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 4. This is part 7 of many, many parts. Okay, we're in the Beatitudes of the Sermon on the Mount. We only covered the first one. And I mentioned, that you can get a good... I spent a lot of time on that subject of blessed are the poor in spirit. What does it mean to be poor in spirit in my study on poverty and prosperity, which is number 29 actually, on oraclesofgod.org, and I'll bring that up later as far as the website address. Let's continue with the second and on. Well, let's read them all right now, because I think I read them yesterday, but now we only covered one. So, verse 4, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Verse 3, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. I have to exercise my face. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Did I read blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth? We're going to cover it extensively. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are ye, when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. All right, so we did blessed are the poor in spirit. Now we will look at blessed are those that mourn. And the term blessed, it's kind of archaic, right? We can't understand what it means to be blessed, right? We think of it, a lot of times people think of it in terms of money. I have money, I have currency, I'm blessed. I'm so blessed I've got money and possessions and other things. Maybe it's you're blessed with so many wonderful children, Paul, or you're blessed with such a good wife. And so blessings is not just money, but it's another kind of currency. It is good things. But the word means actually in Greek, how happy. It refers rather to the state of mind. And because you can have things that we would consider blessings, right? We can have like money. There are people who are rich but not happy. There are people who are married but not happy. And that's why we even say happily married. He's a happily married man. So that's important. It's important not just to have blessings, but to be blessed in them, to feel the blessing. And or in that sense, I don't know that necessarily the poor are happy. But what he's saying is they ought to be happy. They ought to have that state of bliss, of supreme happiness, because of where they stand. And that's what this is saying, that these things are blessings, and they ought to be recognized as such. And so, those that mourn. Whenever you're mourned, when you mourn, well, usually when you're bereaved, right? And you usually don't feel blessed when you're bereaved. When let's say you've just lost a loved one, you don't think like, I'm so blessed to have lost them. Some people might say, oh, I'm so blessed to have lived with them. But, you'll say that, but not in a state of happiness necessarily. Unless you just celebrated your 80th wedding anniversary and you're 90 something. You'd have to be, like 98, You've been married a long time or something like that. So, and you say, well, it's, it can't go on forever in this world. But, what ways can we be blessed in our mourning? What does he mean by that? In another place, he says, happy are they that mourn now. And in the Proverbs, it says, better to be in the house of mourning than in the house of mirth. In Isaiah chapter 22, it says, in that day that the Lord called to weeping and mourning, to girding with sackcloth, to baldness, and all the other signs of mourning. Yet, behold, joy and gladness, killing of oxen, preparing feasts. And the sentiment is, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Tomorrow we do die. Tomorrow, the quintessential proverbial tomorrow. Tomorrow we all die. That is the truth. Some tomorrow, sometime in the future, yet to come, we will die. And what is our attitude towards that? It is so easy in life, and this is how people live. You don't live obsessed with death. And I'm not saying that's what he wants you to do here. But we live, we know we shall die. But we live every day. We take pleasure in each day. Because it's the only way to function. But on some level, we ought to mourn our passing. Or we ought to look at our mortality and consider it. And the ultimate, why are we mortal to begin with? Because of our sin. And I mean that collectively, humanity, that the first man sinned, and every man thereafter. And we're all worthy of death. Not that, I consider it inevitable that man would die. Yeah. So it's inevitable. I consider it inevitable that man would have sinned and died. Just like it's inevitable in all our lives that we sin. We need such precious little provocation. Children sin immediately. Immediately they offend, they miss the mark. How can they do anything else? The idea that they would come out anything but selfish and entitled little brats is, beyond comprehend. The thought, like, oh yes, little angels is what they are. Little fallen angels is what they are, more likely. They have, whatever. I don't want to get into the children. But as sinners, we die. And therefore, our sin ought to cause mourning. And all the sins of mankind, all the disunity between God and man. God has hid himself from us. I think that light's not going to be half as bad as yesterday. I put a piece of paper up there to block it. Anyways, so our lives are sort of caught up in this sin and death thing. And what is our response? Well, let's eat and drink, and there's nothing we can do about it. We ought rather mourn to some degree our sins, not just be flippant about them. And this is also, Jesus is talking to man, to humans, not to people necessarily who have received the gospel. He's preaching the gospel. You know what I mean? And he's saying these are the people who are able to receive it. The poor, those that mourn, the poor in spirit. Because you can be rich in the things of this world and still be poor in the spirit. Which means not think you're full. Not be full of yourself. Not be full of your wealth and be filled up in it and be satisfied with your life completely to the point where you don't take any thought for God or for your soul or for eternal life or for your death. Say, well, my death, that's tomorrow. Today we will eat and drink and not worry about tomorrow. Sometimes it's good to consider tomorrow. We can't sufficient to the day is the evil thereof, Jesus also said. There's a sort of a balance between a lot of ideas. A lot of times people take one idea in the New Testament and they try to carry it to the extreme. We should be always mourning. Rejoice with them that rejoice, mourn with them that mourn. But a mournful attitude towards sin and death, not a flippant attitude. It's about being serious. Let the elders be grave. Let them be sober. It's about having sobriety of mind and having a attitude of that the things of this life are serious. There's cause for mourning. We can rejoice in the moment. It's not saying you can't, but some people never stop and think. Never stop to mourn a little bit. Never stop to consider the situation. And we would, if we never stop and consider, if we're always just happy party people, going from one pleasure to the next, from one, happy scene to the next, we aren't truly going to be blessed in the things that the gospel brings, because it would bring us salvation from something we don't have any feeling that we need to be saved from. If we're just eat and drink for tomorrow we die, and let's just live in pleasure today, and tomorrow will be like today, possibly, and if not, it'll take care of itself. If there's some attitude about tomorrow, not when it comes to the things of the flesh, but when it comes to the things of the spirit, like Jesus said, he's thinking of the future. He says, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. That's in the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to cover it. So, there is this sort of forward-looking attitude in the spirit with what you're doing on earth to prepare for that time. And so, some mournful attitude is appropriate. The second one, and of course, because why? Because there is ultimate comfort in that. Because the comfort comes to those who mourn. Those who do not mourn have no need of comfort. They are already taking comfort in things other than the gospel, other than that which Jesus offers. And so they will not receive this blessing. They will not be enriched by it. The next beatitude is, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Remember, it says, blessed are the meek, not blessed are the weak. I thought that up when I was thinking about this ahead of time. It's blessed are the meek, not blessed are the weak. We're not called to be weak in the sense of, certainly not in a spiritual sense. And I can't say I ever recommend being weak physically either. I make my kids be strong. I guess that should be a little lower. Oh well, it won't be distracting. Even though it just distracted me. Blessed are the meek. Meek means essentially, it doesn't mean to be weak. What it means to have power, but be in control of that power. My original teacher, Arnold Murray, and I always think it's interesting, where do these guys come up with these analogies? They said, what it means is to be like a war horse is meek, meaning like the way a horse is broken, is what I figured he meant by that. A horse is broken and trained and under control, meaning it can kill, it can trample, it can stomp people down in the midst of battle, but it is under the control of its, I was going to say pilot, got airplanes in the brain, horseman, rider, its master. And that's, you want to be master of all your power, certainly. Another guy I heard more recently described as those who carry the sword and know how to use it, but don't. And again, I thought, where did I get that actual so specific in the meaning? I think that there's someplace, it was in some literature in the ancient Greek writings, it was written like that, and that struck them. And that's fine. I don't know how accurate that all is, because I've never been able to replicate that, if you want to go looking it up. But it's quite obvious that he would never call us to be just like, Jesus was meek but not weak. You know what I mean? Wilt thou that we call down fire? when he went to certain cities, they did not receive him. And his disciples said, hey, how about we call down fire from heaven as Elijah did? Because they won't hear you. Wouldn't that be fun, Jesus? That's what his disciples had thought maybe that would be an appropriate response. And Jesus, of course, said, no. You don't know what spirit you're of. There is a time for using the sword. I mean, you look at the book of Revelation. I mean, Jesus is portrayed as coming back in rivers of blood, and not meek and lowly and riding on an ass, but on a war horse, and with the sword drawn for sure. So that is there's a place for both. But, in general, those who, certainly what I'm saying is not that that isn't the opposite of meek, but someone can be meek and capable of violence. In fact, what I'm saying is it doesn't mean to be weak and incapable of violence, but rather to be controlled, to be under your own control or under the control of another. Those who are self-controlled, they will inherit the earth. Some people don't control themselves. Whether it is in terms of violence, whatever. The sun's going up any second. Whether it's in terms of violence or whether it's in terms of, verbally. Sorry, I'm itching. Whether it's verbally or any other way, being quick with your words, quick to speak. We ought to be slow to speak, ready to listen, not so, we don't want to be loose cannons. And that's like the opposite of a meek person is the opposite of a loose cannon. You ever heard someone described as a loose cannon? And I guess the idea is that it means, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I always thought it meant sort of apt to go off, apt to fire unexpectedly, a loose cannon. You don't know when it's going to blow off its projectile. There's no predicting it. So, there is a time for deadly force. There's a time for harsh words. There's a time for every purpose under heaven, as it is written in the book of Ecclesiastes. And therefore, we should be trained and ready to use those things. I have 7 sons, and they all train in wrestling and in submission, grappling, and stuff like that, because I do believe they ought to be dangerous. I own firearms because I want to be able to protect, but I don't like run around with my gun in my pocket, though. Or don't run around ready to shoot, let's say. Maybe I do run around with it in my pocket. Who knows? It's nothing wrong with having it in your pocket or in your holster, or whatever. That's not the point. You can run around with a gun. The question is, do you know when to use it? And that goes verbally as well as physically, because I think that's an important aspect, because very often it is words that lead to violence or that lead to bad outcomes, being just too quick to speak. In God's kingdom, sometimes in the world, the bold and the brash are the ones who prosper, right? They're the ones who get ahead, or it seems like that. They're the ones who, who get the fast outcomes. They have like, you act now. What's the other one? What's those? He who hesitates is lost. And that kind of attitude. And that can be true, but we also have another proverb: he who hesitates is lost, and they say, look before you leap. So both can be true. But anyone who applies the one at all times, meaning they always say, well, never hesitate, never think twice. There are times when you shouldn't think twice. You got to recognize the situation. I mean, you got to recognize when it is you need to use that kind of, it's like I can think of examples like when I've been driving at times, when I've evaded an accident, or I made a decision to just go straight ahead. I'm like, there's no evading that deer. It's time, I'm going to run it down. Recognizing situations where you have to make a fatal decision. We do not want to be rash. In fact, that would be a good opposite of meek, is rash, but not weak. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. People, they don't care about righteousness. They don't care about holiness. A lot of people, or it seems so, what they care about is their salvation. What they care about is, will I go to heaven? And those are the questions that occupy their mind. As far as in the religious sphere, all they're concerned about is their own skin. And, it's kind of sad, because it's like, heaven is a place of righteousness. The kingdom of heaven is a kingdom that is righteous and holy. And if we really have no taste for that, then there is no place for us there. I mean, if we do not hunger and thirst, if it's not something we're desperate for, like the way you need to drink, the way you need to eat. I need to be right. I need to be right with God, and also just right in my behavior. I need to have, it's not just a question of, judicially being saved and having Christ's blood on you. I want God to, what's the word again? Impute His righteousness to me. That sounds good. No, but to actually have this need viscerally, internally, to pursue right things. It's like, if you don't have that, there's like no life in you in the things of God. If you don't have some desire to be right, not just intellectually correct, not just, like I said, it's like sometimes you could think of it in like, I want to be right with God so I can go to heaven. I want to be right. I want to have the right ideas. I think of that a lot because I think early in my walk, I'm trying to think of like how that actually went. Because actually, I know that as a child, and from a child, I was very, I wanted to be a good guy. I wanted to be, I did not envision myself as a villain. And who does? Everyone kind of puts themselves in the position of the hero of their own story. But, we don't want to think of ourselves as being bad. But I understood the difference, and I wanted to be good, from a young age. But when I got older, you discover the pleasures of sin. And then, because people tell you about them, or you just discover them on your own. For me, it was people telling me about it at a young age, certain things, and then later on other things. And saying, try this, or this is what you want to do, or, this is how we are all living this is how we live out our lives. We sin. We seek pleasure. We don't control ourselves. We let ourselves go. We do whatever seems at the moment pleasurable. And then when I started studying the Word when I was when I was 19. At that time, the ministry that was teaching me didn't even really preach any righteousness. It was just like, Jesus forgives you. And that's the message a lot of people have. I mean, it's funny because it's like, I see people, and I know they're Christians, right? And I guess I think of a lot of women. You know they're Christians. They'll. If you went on their Facebook page, you'd see like little God stuff, and then their behavior is very contrary, right? Especially, and it's weird because I do think that in general people would look at me from the outward and they'd say, he lives a righteous life. They'd look at my wife and think the same. Now, of course, we both still struggle with sins. And we have things that we pray about and we want to be delivered from, and we want God to teach us how to be better. But, we don't openly do things publicly that sort of say like, hey, I love to sin. You know what I mean? But I see people who do. And I know they're believers. I know they believe in Jesus. Or if you came up with them and said there is no God and Jesus is a fable, they'd put their hands on their hips and you'd have a fight. They'd probably fight about it more adamantly than I'd be like, really? Is that what you think? I'm not going to get all worked up about it because I have confidence in my faith and I don't need someone else to affirm it for me. So, it's baffling on a certain level because it's like, I thought, I see God stuff out of you, and then I see your public behavior, and it seems like you have no regard for that at all. And that conflict between their outward behavior and their outward expression of faith is indeed baffling. And I feel like that's how I was when I was young. Like, Christianity was put to me as a sort of intellectual exercise. God, as Arnold Murray famously said, or I famously quote him, I don't know if anyone else, this means much to him, but, I remember watching him, and of course I remember this very much because it affected the way I lived my life and the way I thought of my faith and my walk in Christ. He says, God doesn't care about your little old sexual sins. He doesn't really care about that. What he cares about is whether or not you're going to worship the devil. He honestly said that. And it's like, how did I buy into that? You know why? Because it's what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear that because I had little old sexual sins and I didn't want God to care about them. You know what I mean? Because I wasn't going to worship the devil. Someone comes up to me and says, do you believe in Jesus? I'm going to say, yes, I do, sir. I'm not going to deny the Lord with my lips. But I will gladly, continue in sin if he doesn't care about it. And but I did care about it, even though he told me God doesn't care. And I primarily pursued my faith as an intellectual exercise. I did care. And what helped me care was my wife certainly cared. But there was, but I had to care too, because she could never really see the depths of everything, because what goes on in your mind. You have to care about righteousness. You have to care about holiness, about how you carry yourself in the world, how you act, what you're thinking. And if you don't have a hunger for righteousness and all that, you're just going to be an empty person. You won't be filled with the things of righteousness. And it goes to that thing, that story that really affected me at one point where I've talked about it before, I'll talk about it again. I had a child who took a great interest in Dad's tools. And he wanted, can I have tools? And I was like, sure. And every time I was going out, I found myself, he was just so into them and playing with them. I'm like, well, if you're into them and playing with them, I'll get you little tools. Kind of real, not just the plastic garbage kind, for in the house, sure. But out in my barn, I set them up like a little workshop area and all this. And that was the first time I had ever done anything like that, and that was my 6th child. And I thought, it's funny, I never did this for why am I doing this for this one? Because he bugged me. Because he wanted it. And that's the thing, if you want righteousness, if you bug God for righteousness, you can be filled with righteousness. You know what I mean? But those who do not ask do not receive. Those who do not seek it do not find it. Those who aren't hungry after it don't get to eat it. And that's critical, because you don't want to be the person who just doesn't care. And it goes back to all the other things too, you know, being poor in spirit, being mournful, being meek. You know, because you know, because how would meek have anything to do with righteousness? Well, in a sense of like the holier than thou thing, it's like you can turn it into a weapon. Your own sense of self-righteousness, it can become like a weapon to be, you know, not be so I mean, I've known people who had gone a long way in their life towards righteousness. I mean, they were away from sin and iniquity and towards holiness and righteousness. They'd gone a long way. And the temptation to declare perfection was, well, they did. They sort of basically said, I'm without sin. It was something they wanted to say. They declared it ahead of time. They wanted to be able to declare themselves without sin. I could only claim that with like the caveat that like through the blood of Christ. But for practical purposes on the ground, it's not yet accomplished. You know, they want to claim that. And the problem with doing that and with calling yourself righteous or perfect is that people will see that you are not. You will err. Unless you're truly at the point. I don't see any point in actually declaring it at all, because humility sort of forbids that kind of, you know, praising of yourself. You know, let another man's lips praise you. Let them say good things about you. Just be righteous. You know, like, don't declare. Yeah, I mean, like, for me to sit here and I would rather, like Paul said, I would rather glory in my weaknesses. I don't want to sit here and tout my righteousness. That just is, that's just foolish. You know, you should not tout your righteousness to other people or your perfection, because they will then they're going to start looking at you and they will find fault with you, even if there are no faults, because that's how people are. People find faults even where they are not, especially if someone makes some sort of claim to being perfect or even great. So hunger and thirst after righteousness, do not lose it. You know, if you think you're, you know, because the scribes and Pharisees thought they were righteous. It's one of the Jesus gripes against them, was that they made the outside of the cup and the platter clean, but the inside was full of corruption and excess. And that's the thing. It's very easy to appear righteous to men. As Jesus said, they appear righteous to men, but inwardly they are full of corruption. They're like whited sepulchres. This is Matthew 23. We'll get there. In so many ways, in the outward, they appear to be something they're not. And it's so easy to do that. But here's the thing. Out of the heart proceeds all the evils of mankind. And your heart will betray you. People will see what's inside. You know, and someone who is, if I'm outwardly able to constrain myself, it's not that hard to just put on, I mean, it's not that hard, but some people also have a very difficult time, keeping that in line. The outward behavior, obviously. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't have crime and we wouldn't have conflicts with each other and such. So, but it's relatively easy to keep the outward behavior in line. And when someone has come to that point in their life, I mean, by the time you're 50, you might be able to just, no one ever sees you sin. You know? I don't think I'd have to go, I mean, my wife would see things. But I mean, what I'm saying is, like, you can get that, you can get there. But it's like, there are still other things. And that if you start, the Lord has a way that if we start making ourselves out to be something we're not, He has a way of bringing us down, especially if He loves us. I mean, if He does not chastise us in our foolishness, then we are bastards and not sons. You know, I mean, we are not children. We are not His children. He isn't correcting us. He isn't treating us like a father should. Because if I start behaving in a way that makes God not love me or like me, I mean, if I'm behaving in a way that makes him, that is abominable to him, and he just lets me do that behavior and then even rewards it and reinforces it, I'm a vessel of wrath, not a vessel of mercy. And that goes on to the next beatitude. Subscribe to Line by Line Bible Studies. It's healthy for you. Okay? Hold on a second. And also there's oraclesofgod.org. I'm just going to fix something here. All right. Let's see if my, oh, I think I did a good job. There we go. All right. And, of course, the other stuff. And questions and answers. You can send your questions to questions. I just noticed one of the questions went into the spam folder. There was a question, which I will get to eventually here. Not today. But at the next topical. Oh, I didn't lower it quite lower enough. Oh, well, whatever. That's better. I'll get it. I got a little sun blocker hanging there, and I just still got some of the sunshine there. So we'll get that sorted out. Though, as winter comes, I suppose I'll have to move it. All right. So, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Those who are hungry after righteousness will be filled with righteousness, and the merciful will obtain mercy. And what is the, what's the alternative to be unmerciful? If we go, and Jesus does this in the parables. If we go around smiting our fellow servants, or he used the analogy of someone who is forgiven. We've been forgiven much. God has passed over our sins. Even if you, let's say you're a believer and you've obtained the righteousness you sought after, and you are obedient to the truth and all these things. Pardon me. But then you go to your brother, and they're younger. So I would say it's like, they're 20, they're 25, 30, whatever. And you start judging them as if they were like you, 50 or 45. Both ages I have not yet attained. But you start judging them based on where you are. Or even if they're older, you don't know where they're coming from, where they're going. We ought to have an attitude of mercy towards people and not of condemnation. God loves mercy. He must, because otherwise he'd kill us all. There's no reason for us to continue except that he is merciful. The human experiment, so to speak, not that God is playing around, but from our perspective, it could be looked at like that. It's gone on long enough. It has. We've had our time. There's no grand reason for us other than his mercy and bringing lowly creatures such as ourselves to salvation and to preserve our lives. That's it. You think of the mercy of God, then you think you ought to be merciful towards your fellow men. You ought to be merciful in the way you deal with them in the in the judgments. It gets towards forgiveness and stuff. I had someone come to me recently and they said, my my best friend's son burglarized my house and stole some of my precious things, and they felt so violated, and they said I'm having trouble forgiving them. And but the thing is, the person they weren't caught. They weren't brought to justice. There was nothing happened. They got away with it essentially. And I understand that someone getting away with it, it's hard to forgive them. You still are in your heart, you feel this sort of anger and resentment. But it's not like you're having them thrown in prison. It's not, or that I mean, like if that happened to me, I suppose I'd want to have them arrested and then maybe not press charges, especially if they're a minor. Yeah, I mean, I don't have much of value to steal. I definitely understand that. You know, someone like kills your family member. You know, why would you not want to just stomp their faces in? You know, that's how I think about those things. That's that's the rage of my inner workings. Like, I know, because it's like I'll think about that from time. You know, I'll be out coming home and like have some thought come on me, like, what if I came home to some horrible thing, or what if when they're out, you know, when my children go out, something happened or someone did something to some of them. My thoughts are never merciful in that regard. And it's should they be? Well, if I want to obtain mercy, I'd have some, you know, mercy in me. You know, let me put it this way, because I'm sort of going down track. I'm thinking like, yeah, I don't feel, but you're taking like the most egregious things. You know, like, yeah, when it comes to the hardest things, I might not have such a merciful attitude towards, but neither does God. Though he forgives the greatest of sinners. That's the thing. You got to think about things like Paul. He was having Christians hauled off to their deaths. He consented to the stoning of Stephen. And it's we got to be mindful that God raises everybody up. And not only that, everything that happens in this world is part of God's plan. And so, as difficult as it may be to forgive the worst things, or to be, let's put it this way, even if you're not, you don't feel instantaneous, you don't have to feel it instantly, like, oh, I forgive it, it's all right, just kill my family. You don't have to think like that. But in wrath, like it says of the Lord, it says, "O Lord, in wrath remember mercy." The Lord has wrath and he has mercy, and he is merciful to whom he has mercy, on whom he will have mercy. He could have mercy on your enemy. You know? Sometimes, you know, because it's funny, because you think of Paul, the apostle. You know, he that was once our enemy is now preaching the same things. And like, I don't know, if he had hauled away your family, would you feel so great about it? Oh, isn't that wonderful? Now he's preaching the truth. Well, you know, when we have a mind that understands that that is God's will, ultimately, if you want to be angry at God, and see where that gets you. You know what I mean? I mean, seriously, where does that lead? Where you're raging against them, rage against the Maker who made them. And where does that take you? Do you get satisfaction from that? Did you think you were entitled to that relationship? Did you think that life was meant to go on forever? You've got another thing coming. You know, all your rage and all your hatred of all the things that you know, those who come against you and those people who hurt you or hurt those you love, it is unjustifiable, because you have no right to anything. There is no such, you know, we talk about rights, but ultimately there are none. Yeah, you know, we don't even have the right to non-existence. God is only merciful in letting, you know, he could just bring us all into being and torture us forever. Some people believe that's what he does. And you can't say it's right or wrong, because God is the ultimate arbitrator of what is right and what is wrong, what is just and what is unjust. And so you be merciful, because if you're not, he's not going to be merciful towards you. God delights in mercy, but you know, he also has wrath. There's wrath. But he has ordained that those who enter into his kingdom shall be merciful. And so, as much as I might feel rage and anger and hatred towards someone who might like murder one of my family members, harm, It's totally, and I can simply say I would feel rage and hatred and anger, and I would be inclined to violence and murder. I know this in myself. These are the things that dwell in me. I mean, like if I came upon a scene, I come in my house and there's someone in there and they've murdered one of my family members, and they've got, and then they come at me. I want to defeat them and kill them as slowly as possible. That's what I want to do. And I pray that I be not so tempted. But I've got no right to my rage. There's no right to it. If we want mercy from God, we need to be merciful. Like I said, it doesn't mean meek does not mean weak. It doesn't mean you just roll over and let yourself be killed for no reason, or fail to defend people. But in wrath, remember mercy, lest God forget about mercy when his wrath is burning against you. Don't go overboard. That's what I'm saying. It's like, careful. Wrath is a dangerous thing. It's one of the works of the flesh. People talk about righteous indignation, and yeah, there's a certain indignant thought that comes to, there can be angry and sin not, but there's a fine line there. I mean, where do you draw the line? How do you know? Well, you best be careful. Sin lies at the door. You know what I mean? It's the path to great sin, anger is. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. How about that? You want to see God? Think about that. To see God. Not just to visually see him. Because that's, people, there's an old thing in the Old Testament, like, where people say, I've seen God and I lived. Because they thought that if they saw God, they would die. And actually, you would. You can't see God. You can see parts of him. That's what happened to Moses. He says, no man can see me and live, but I'll let you see my backside. And the idea there is that we can perceive God in part. Now, Jesus is fully divine. He is fully God, but people saw him. But when you saw Jesus, you saw him as a person who was divine, but you did not see the fullness of his divinity when you saw him, because he appeared as a normal man. Same thing with any appearance of God where men have seen God. They did not see God in his fullness, though what they saw was God. It's like if you look at my finger is me. Like this is not separate from me in the least bit. You could separate it from me because it's, because it's possible. What I'm saying is, though, it is completely me, but it is not the complete picture of me, of who I am. Even when you look at me outwardly, you look at me, you see me as a human being, and you see this guy, But you don't really see into my heart. You don't see what I am. You don't know. I could be a deceiver sitting here. You see it all the time. You see people, but you don't see them for what they really are. You don't really perceive what you're encountering, what you're dealing with. It is hard to see into the hearts of men, and men go to a great deal of trouble to conceal things about themselves. They certainly don't go to a great deal of trouble to reveal things about themselves. There's things people want to keep secret, but we ought to walk rather in the light. And if we want to see God, to truly see him, we need to be pure, not just outwardly, but inwardly. I'm saying, like, righteousness is not just this external thing, but rather an internal thing. To have pure hearts, to be pure through and through. Because no unrighteous thing can stand in God's presence. No unholy thing can appear before him. We have to be purified. You know what I'm saying? Like, our hearts have to become pure if we want to see God. And we will, because that is what he does. He purifies us. But also the idea of pure heart has the idea of purity of intentions, right? Like people do wrong, but you can say, but they have a pure heart, meaning they don't want to do wrong. It's definitely on that level, like to see, because I'm going to take different thoughts of this, because he doesn't explain what he means. But like you think about it, God sees the heart. He looks on the heart. Like, you can do bad things, but not want to do bad things, or not out of bad intentions. Obviously, it's that only goes so far, right? There's sometimes that people do bad things, and you can't say, I did it with good intentions. No man can really say. Sometimes we believe it. Like, people do things, they sin against us, and we think, well, we forgive them because we think they don't really want to do that. They don't mean it. And that may be correct. Or may be wrong. We don't know. But God does. And those who enter into his presence will be pure in heart. And here's the thing. Jesus said, out of the heart proceeds all the evil of men. It was in the middle of saying, nothing going into a man can defile him, but that which comes out of him defiles him. For out of the heart proceeds murder, fornication, and all manner of evil. And so, all the things we do outwardly proceed forth from the inward. And even if you're keeping all that bottled up, it's still important to God that what's inside be right. So it's a very tall order, that God is looking for from us. It's not something we can just provide of our own. It's something we need the Spirit of God to enter into our heart and purify our hearts. There's this song, "Purify My Heart," let it be as gold. There's all the songs we sing about being purified. And it goes back to being hungry and thirsty after righteousness. Do you want to be purified? Are you just content with fooling people? Or is there, or do you have a greater goal in mind? And that's the thing, is like we have to have the greater goal in mind. So meaning the greater goal in mind is, I want to see God. And I know he sees me. He sees me where no men see me. Therefore, and that in essence is that's why he knows my heart is pure. Because I know he sees me. And he knows I want to see him. You know what I mean? That is, like that we're not sinning in defiance of God. We're not sinning in defiance of God, or that we're careless of him. But rather through the powerlessness of our existence, the fact that we are weak and frail, and we need his mercy. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. God, those who make peace, the peacemakers. So sometimes people love to make war and conflict, to sow discord. As one of the things the Lord hates is from the Proverbs is he that sows discord among brethren. And that's what people do. I just realized I'm just like orange today. I just realized that. It's probably this shirt. It's like blue, okay, everything else is orange. Whatever. So they should be called the children of God. We want, a lot of times people will say, we're all God's children. All of us, we are God's children. And in the one sense, that is true. In the sense that we are his creation, right? We are all his creation, and we are his children, but that's no different than dogs or animals. They're also his children. I mean, oftentimes in the scriptures, when it talks about being a child of God, it means in a special sense. Like Jesus Christ is the Son of God in a very special sense. In a sense that none of us are the sons of God. He is the Son of God. And also in the sense that not all of us are, but we can become the sons of God, the children of God. And I'm certain in Greek it's sons there, because they always said sons. But it doesn't mean male or female. You know, in Christ there is no male or female. It's just the way they used to refer to. And I'll tell you, you know, because as a woman, you want to be God's son. As far as in the way that they talked about these things. You aren't regarded as his daughter. You are his son and heir. You know, because that's how that was done. Girls were married off to other families and such. But sons were heirs, especially firstborn son. So even as a woman, you are God's son. And that's because that is of the human relations. You know, maybe that doesn't speak as loudly as it used to. I think it still does, because even though they've devalued our sons, I have not. I still regard it as important. Not that it takes away from the value of a daughter, but like, well, you know, is it necessary to raise one up by bringing the other down? Yeah, I mean, like, because that's kind of like in the world, the way they want to deal, you know, they always rail about income inequality. And mostly what they don't tell you is that, yes, the rich have gotten richer and the poor have gotten richer too. But just the rich have gotten a lot more richer faster than the poor. So relatively, they are more wealthy, and this bugs people. It's just pure jealousy and greed. They hate the rich. It's not that they love the poor. They could care less. And if it made us all more equal, they'd be happy to chop them down to size, even if it diminished everyone at the same time. So it is not necessary to bring, and my point in saying that is like, we ought not, by diminishing one, we may make things more equal, but everything as a whole is diminished also by taking that away. When we take things away like that, we're not necessarily, you know, helping anyone. All we're doing is, we're satisfying ourselves, and, you know, creating this false sense of self-satisfaction in having diminished something good, or someone who has been successful, which is not the same. It's not. There's nothing right about that. You know, it says of the rich, let them learn to distribute, not to let them be robbed and have their goods forcibly distributed. I want to skip down. I'm going to go back to where we were. Okay. So, make peace, not war. You know, make love, not war, they used to say. God loves those who make peace and not those who create conflict. You know, in families, there's often those people who will go around tale-bearing and intentionally sowing discord. And it's not good. Same thing in churches. There are those who will try to create conflicts. Sometimes conflicts are unavoidable. And you have to have some sort of conflict. You know, you got to make a stand. As again, it's about being meek. It's not being weak. Meaning, like, let's say someone comes into the church and start preaching a form of legalism. I experienced this. Or they start preaching things that are not profitable. This happened. I mean, I'm sort of justifying my own actions in the past, but whatever. I think it's true that sometimes people preach things or teach things that they ought not, and we need to make a stand against it and not make peace with it. Now, we may want to make peace or not create, because, like, you try, and if it doesn't work, maybe it's time to go. Yeah, I prefer to have peace among brethren than, but I have to make my stand. You know, and so there's a time for fighting, for sure. But, you know, if there was no conflict, then where comes the peacemaking? It's not, I mean, it's those who make peace in the midst of conflict or try. You know, as it says in the Psalms, I wanted to make peace, but they were all for war. they wouldn't have peace. Because that's the thing. Some people won't have peace because they just won't listen to reason. They won't listen to truth. And so there will be no peace. But we ought to be makers of peace. I mean, our goal. Yeah, I've heard people say, because I've had a lot of argumentation, I should say, online over my opposition to Arnold Murray, right? And people write me, and and some people say, well, you just are debating to debate. That's not true. There are plenty of times when people write me things like someone at one point contacted me about something I had said about the nature of God, the Trinity, and things like that, and they challenged me on something I said that I think was, I thought the Father was not visible. I'm like, the only time you ever see, because I just thought it was elegant in my mind to say the Son of God was God visible, but the Father was not visible. Because it says in places he isn't visible. And I was challenged on that and shown in the scriptures, well, there are places where you see something that can only be regarded as some sort of visible manifestation of the Father. So to say that every manifestation of God is just the Son of God would not be correct. And so I was like, you're right. I'm like, no need to say any more. I'm like, those scriptures are pretty definitive. I guess I had an idea I wanted to be true, and I didn't investigate it. And so I agreed, I didn't even let him go on. He kept going, and I was like, no, that's enough. I think he thought I was just cutting off the conversation. Like, I don't want to talk to you. That's enough. He was kind of surprised. I remember that. So, and that's not just to justify myself. My point is just that, things are worth fighting over. He didn't. As soon as I agreed, he made peace with me and said, brother, you know what I mean? Like, that's making peace. You could just keep the fight up and say, like, I don't think you're sincere. You know what I mean? Or just fight for fighting's sake, because people do. Some people argue just to argue. They're not really listening. And I wouldn't say necessarily they argue just to argue, but some people do, I suppose. They're not serious. But people sometimes are serious, but they're just not listening. They're not listening to the other side. If you're not listening to the other side, you can't possibly make peace. Because if you're not listening to what they're saying, there's no way to formulate an argument that could take you towards peace. You know what I mean? If I just keep saying, like, you're wrong, and this is what I think, and then they say, well, what about this? And I just ignore that and just say, no, that doesn't matter. You're wrong, and my reasons. If I don't address their concerns, how am I going to make peace? How am I going to have a chance of convincing them? That's why when I study the scriptures and stuff, or when I do a topical, I try to look at the other side. I try to take, what are the scriptures that they would bring in opposition? If there was scriptures someone would bring in opposition to righteousness, and say, like, well, here's a scripture that says we should commit wickedness, or the righteousness isn't important, or that sin doesn't matter. If some people brought that to me, I would say, I would look at it and address it. I would not be like, well, it doesn't matter. Your reasons aren't important to me. That's no way to make peace or to end an argument. So we will cover the last two, the persecution and reviling, when we pick it up tomorrow. This is Line by Line Bible Studies. You should subscribe to Line by Line Bible Studies. And for more studies, songs, and more, go to oraclesofgod.org. Assuming my new host doesn't let me down. If there is a problem, you'll find out about it on the 28th. I'll tell you that. But never fear. I will, if necessary, rebuild the whole thing from scratch. It's somehow and piece by piece. So, I mean, a website will be up very quickly. Whether or not the content will be there is entirely another question. And email could go dark for a while, so at least my forwards, you may get stuff coming back if you send me messages. Anyways, enough with the gloom and doom. Also the questions address questions at oraclesofgod.org. I know it's working because someone sent a question. Unfortunately, it went right to spam. So I love those spam filters. Isn't that wonderful? My other email doesn't have one. And that's kind of unfortunate sometimes, right? You just get nothing but spam. But I've never had a spam filter that didn't filter out things that weren't spam. So I don't understand. Okay. Well, anyways, thank you for joining me in this study. My name is Paul Strangini. I look forward to studying with you again soon. That would be tomorrow.